Hello, my followers. Today I want to answer the question, should you read Meditations by Marcus Aurelius? The quick answer, if you're in a rush, is probably not. Maybe set it aside and use it as a reference book, the way you might use Psalms or Sun Tzu, The Art of War. Reading it cover to cover will probably just kind of fry your brain, and I don't think you'd get much out of it. So that's the short answer, but I want to answer a little bit about who is Marcus Aurelius, who was Marcus Aurelius, what is this book, okay? And then reasons to read it, reasons not to read it. I have a feeling that I'm going to fail miserably my attempt to keep this concise, but let's get into it. All right, so Meditations is it's not a book about the Stoic philosophy. It's not one of the great works of Stoicism. It is the sort of journal of a Roman emperor trying to lead the Stoic life. Okay, so it's compared in the introduction to with Imitations of Christ. Okay, it's a book by a devout person trying to adhere to a philosophy. It's a journal. He apparently did not write this with the idea of sharing it, though I'm not sure how we know that, but he was just writing this for himself. The most interesting stuff for me was in the introduction about Marcus Aurelius's life. He was a nobleman raised to become the Roman emperor. He was also extremely sickly. He constantly had problems with his health, but he proved himself to be courageous and of good character, and that seemingly helped him rise to the throne. He had quite a few children, all but one of whom died. And I think this sort of sadness and resignation to fate kind of permeates the book. It's a lot, like, you can feel him just struggling to get up in the morning, but having a huge sense of responsibility and duty, and that sort of somberness, accept fate, do things the best you can to the extent that you can control them. It permeates the book. His son succeeded him on the throne, and pretty much from what it says in the introduction, screwed up all the modest accomplishments of his father. So, even though there's a marble bust of him and everyone knows his name, Marcus Aurelius was a minor character in Gladiator. He was not the Gladiator, but he was the emperor who had a little bit of interaction with Maximus. The Russell Crowe character was Maximus. So I was saying, even though there's a marble bust of him and his name kind of, evokes something regal and lofty and great, he was somewhat of a failure. Physically his health failed him, and his son was a disastrous emperor who did not do justice to what sounds like the modest accomplishments of Marcus Aurelius, of his father. He did leave behind this very interesting work, which is a good peek into the world of Stoicism. From what I understand, a lot of Stoicism is lost. When Christianity was expanding, libraries were burned, works were destroyed, but it used to be a big thing with formal Stoic teachers, formal Stoic philosophers, formal Stoic great works. I'm actually not sure how much of it survives. I probably should have looked that up before making this video. But okay, let's begin and start with some sort of examples of what this book does. This is from the introduction, and it's comparing Stoicism to Christianity. While the Romans' temper is the Romans, meaning a member of the Roman Empire, not necessarily me. While the Romans' temper is modest and self-reliant, the Christian aims at a more passive mood, humbleness and meekness, and reliance on the presence and personal friendship of God. The Roman scrutinizes his faults with severity, but without the self-contempt which makes the Christian, quote, vile in his own sight, end quote. So from what I gather, Stoicism takes the vision of a rising beast. Man is a rising beast, whereas Christianity takes the view that man is a fallen angel who, we had it all in the Garden of Eden, but then we committed original sin. This is a really interesting conversation in what are the implications of looking at man as a rising beast versus fallen angel. And I love the rising beast sort of way of thinking much more than the fallen angel one. I think the fallen angel one leads to a lot of bad things, leads to a lot of utopianism. But let's get into it with some typical passages of Stoicism. And the book is organized in these little paragraphs, as you can see, numbered. So it is a lot like Sun Tzu's The Art of War or the Book of Psalms, where you just like little self-contained nuggets of wisdom, not necessarily consistent. You can find a lot of contradictions in there, but perhaps like good for pondering, maybe sparking some or giving you a context in which to view something that happens to be on your mind. So you could find like little wisdoms in there, but they're not necessarily rigorous. Typical example. As a Roman and a man, you should perform whatever it is that you are about, with true and unfeigned gravity, natural affection, freedom, and justice. And as for all other cares and imaginations, you should ease your mind of them. Okay, very Stoic philosophy. Focus on what's in front of you. I have heard Stoicism referred to as European Buddhism, where it's just focus and putting a lot of things on your mind, but it's more action-oriented and not so resigned, which I quite like. Okay, another very, very typical passage. They seek for themselves private retiring places as country villages, the seashore, mountains. Ye, thou art thyself wont to long for such places, but all this thou must know proceeds from simplicity in the highest degree. At what time soever thou wilt, it is in thy power to retire into thyself and to be at rest and free from all business. Okay, don't seek vacations, or don't necessarily seek vacations, but be able to just vacation inside your own body. Okay, extremely Stoic. Stoic in the sense of the way the word has become a modern adjective. Even though there is much more to Stoic philosophy than can be described by today's adjective. Okay, another example. Receive temporal blessings without ostentation when they are sent, and thou shalt be able to part with them with all readiness and faculty when they are taken from thee again. I'm not the best reader. That was probably hard to follow. All right, two more examples. This one is very Mark Twainish. I have often wondered how it should come to pass that every man, loving himself best, should more regard other men's opinions concerning himself than his own. Also, consider what manner of men, both for soul and body, we ought to be. Whensoever death shall surprise us, the shortness of this our mortal life, the immense vastness of time that has been before and will be after us, the frailty of every worldly material object. So he does grapple with the big issues of philosophy, which in my mind is grappling with our mortality and trying to answer all the should questions. What should I do? How should I be? And maybe that is one of the most compelling reasons to read this book, because you're listening to someone who 2,000 years ago was grappling with a lot of the questions that are as present today as they were then. One of the reasons not to read the book is it's pearls of wisdom, not necessarily consistent. And I would divide this book and what it conveys as just the categorization of things that you should focus on and things you should not focus on, and that's it. And he like, if it was to be more rigorous, I would suggest that that he develop the methodology of why some things are you should ignore, or answer the question, like, it's obvious why he's saying that you should focus on work, you should ignore the possibility of death. Like, that's kind of the formula of how to be fruitful in life, how to achieve your own goals, however you define them. That's the formula. You ignore what you can't control, and you focus on what you can control. So that is the formula. But I think the purpose of the philosophy would not, I don't know, maybe the purpose of the philosophy is not to settle on being successful. Maybe that's not enough for a philosophy. Why should you focus on this? Why should you not be completely nihilistic? But anyway, I did some really cool color-coded tabs. You can see them there. So I'll read through the things he says you should pay attention to, and the things he says we should ignore, and then some criticism of the book, and then some interesting parts, and then I'll complain a little bit about this particular edition. So that's what's coming up. And oh my goodness, I'm already past 10 minutes. All right. All right, so he says, the man must not only consider how daily his life is wasted and decreased, but this also, that if he live long, he cannot be certain whether his understanding shall continue so able and sufficient. Saying you're going to get old. He's saying you're going to get old, so do a good job now. Even if it's not death, it'll be old age and the infirmity, is that the right word? Just when your skills deteriorate with old age, that's also going to get you. So hurry and do a good job. Thou must hasten, therefore, not only because thou art every day nearer unto death, but also because you're going to get old. All right, so that's what he's telling you what to do. Another example. Let nothing be done rashly and randomly, but all things according to the most exact and perfect rules of art. In the morning, when thou find thyself unwilling to rise, consider with thyself presently, it is to go about a man's work that I am stirred up. I am then unwilling to go about that for which I was born and brought myself forth into the world? Or was I made for this? Was I made to lay down and make of myself in a warm bed? All right, he appeals to nature a lot. So when it comes to work, he's saying, hey, work, this is natural. Yeah, okay. He doesn't reason further beyond that. It's natural to do these things. Maybe that's not a criticism of him. Maybe this is sort of elaborated upon. Maybe there's a foundation for this insistence in Stoicism, but this is not a work of Stoicism. This is the journal of an emperor who tried really hard to live a Stoic life. My monitor just went blank. I don't know if you lost me there. Okay, going on. The true joy of a man is to do that which properly belongs unto a man, that which is most proper unto a man. First, to be kindly affected towards them that are of the same kind. Is that an argument for nationalism? To discern rightly all plausible fancies and imaginations, to contemplate the nature of the universe, both it and things that are done in it. Use thyself even unto those things that thou dost at first despair. For the left hand we see, which for the most part lie idle because not used, yet it does hold the bridle, meaning of a horse, with more strength than the right, because it has been used unto it. He's saying, practice even the things that are hard, and you'll get better. I meant this video to be sort of like a exploration of the book. What is the book? So there's a lot of sort of best of things, or Marcus Aurelius quotes, or meditations, selections. And if you're in a rush, maybe you should read that. If you have time and want to explore for yourself, then get the book. But I'm not trying to find the best parts. I'm just trying to find parts that are illustrative of the whole book. All right, things to ignore. Whatever doth happen in the world happens justly. And so, if you will take heed, you shall find it. I say not only in the right order, but by a series of inevitable consequences. Yeah, it's like everything that happens must happen. Okay, you can see the contradiction between that and his encouraging you to work hard. He does address that a little more directly later, but nowhere close to my satisfaction. Okay, another thing you should ignore. From what I understand, this is a passage about disagreement. It says, remember this, within a very little while, both thou and he shall both be dead, and after a little while more, not so much as your names and memories shall remain. Again, speaking to futility. Okay, you can see the purpose why he's doing this, because he's saying don't dwell too much on disagreement, because you're mortal, reminding you that you're mortal. But this can easily be read as nihilistic, and once again, maybe these are deeper questions that are addressed inside of Stoicism. This is like I said, just a journal. Think it no great matter to die rather many years after than the very next day. A lot of indifference unto death. And about you can see in these passages him grappling with the deaths of all but one of his children, about whom elsewhere in the book he takes great pleasure. He makes references to how nice children are. It's one of the good things in life, but you should enjoy it carefully. And I guess I can't imagine what it would be like to lose a child, but you can see it informing the philosophy. Enjoy your children carefully, right? It's very, very sad. What have they got more than they whose death be untimely, and are they not themselves dead unto the last? Here he names names, which is really interesting, as Cadicianus, Fabius, Julianus, Lepidus, or any others, who in their lifetime have buried many, or at last buried themselves. Thou must comfort thyself in the expectations of thy natural dissolution, and in the meantime not grieve at the delay, but rest contented in those two things. First, that nothing shall happen unto thee which is not according to the nature of the universe. Second, that it is in thy power to do nothing against thine own proper God, that inward spirit, for it is not in any man's power to constrain thee to transgress against him. That sounds downright Catholic. Christianity was already a thing in Marcus Aurelius's life, and it's noted in the introduction that despite the similarities between Christianity and Stoicism. He in his life was actually quite hard on Christians, and I don't know more. I'm afraid I don't know much more about it than that. Okay, things to ignore. Lucia buried Versus, and then Lucia herself buried by others. So Secunda Maximus, then Secunda herself. So Epitinchanos Diotimus, then Epitinchanos himself. Long list of names here. Just list of names of people who were buried. Here's another bit of nihilism. It is all one thing to see these things for 100 years together, or but for 3 years. All right, very, very hard to read some of these passages, and I just have just a couple of examples. I'll start with this one, okay? Like, objectively, this is hard to read. Maybe the translator was trying to be faithful to the original text, but it's like the verb is pushed all the way to the end of the sentence. And there's a strange pronoun, she, which, as far as I could tell, refers to the mind, but I had to read this like 3 or 4 times. So objectively, this is hard to read. If thou shalt find anything in this mortal life better than righteousness, than truth, temperance, fortitude, so far so good, and in general better than a mind contented both with those things which according to the right and reason she doth, and in those which without her will and knowledge happen unto thee by the providence, if I say thou canst find out anything better than this, apply thyself to it with thy whole heart. Okay, objectively, that is a tough sentence to digest because the verb is all the way at the end and it has a strange pronoun she, which it's not completely clear what it refers to. So that's another reason why you might want to look up the best of. One of the reasons to read this book is just communing with the ancients. Here's a list of things to take pleasure in, of mundane things to take pleasure in, and I found this list just charming, and I found the physical objects he chooses to name is much more interesting even than the advice, because you read advice after a few pages, if it doesn't apply to you in the present time, like it's not that interesting. It's not that interesting to get advice that doesn't apply to you. So these physical objects, when he tells you to take pleasure in just the choice of them, I found really charming. Pleasing and delightful as a great loaf when it is baked. Figs are accounted fairest and ripest then when they begin to shrink and wither. Ripe olives, when they are next to putrefaction, then they are in their proper beauty. The hanging down of grapes, the brow of a lion, the froth of a foaming wild boar. It's communing with a person from 2,000 years ago. He refers to dogmata a lot, like it's a tool, and by dogmata he means just the pearls of wisdom. All right. I have a feeling that back then they just weren't as rigorous as they are now, even though they had great science. Maybe I'm giving ourselves too much credit, but he refers to dogmata as just this collected wisdoms, not necessarily consistent from one to the next, but he talks about using your dogmata like you use a tool, and I think he elaborates on it. Oh yeah, right here on this page. As for the use of thy dogmata, thou must carry thyself in the practice with them, rather like unto a pancratiasis, a fighter. You can see the root of the word pancration, or one that at the same time both fights and wrestles with his hands and feet like a gladiator. For this, if he loses his sword in the fight, he is gone, whereas the other has his hands free, which may easily turn and manage his as it will. So the tools of a fighter are your pearls of wisdom. This was a really interesting reference. like this isn't the book to read if you want to find out what did the Stoics believe about God. Um, in both from the introduction and from little pieces of the book, you get this idea of a universal spirit, and you get that here. Ever consider and think upon the world as being but one living substance and having but one soul, and how all things in the world are terminated into one sensitive power, and are done by one general motion, as it were, and the liberation of that one soul, and how all things that are concur in the cause of one's other being, and by what manner of connection and concatenations all things happen. I suspect, so this is a little bit similar to the idea of Gaia, which is, I think, a pagan of one world, one God. I suspect it's a lot easier to have these sorts of beliefs when you are the Roman Empire, or when you are America and you are the superpower of the world. I think if you're living on the border of an empire and just feeling the press of a foreign culture and foreign invasion, maybe that whole one God business doesn't quite do it. I'm not sure. So that concludes my review of Meditations. It's a good maybe book if you want to just thumb through something now and then to sort of search for pearls of wisdom. If you're impatient, look up quotes online, or a best of, or a collection, so somebody else can do the work of sorting through it for you. Read it if you want to commune with an emperor, a part of Western civilization from 2,000 years ago. Marcus Aurelius died from illness in his tent while campaigning, so across the from within sight of his adversaries who he would engage on the battlefield. Oh, and on that sad note, let me just make a few little complaints about how this book was put together with really carelessly. They did not heed Marcus Aurelius' advice to do everything with care and with the respect to the art form, because there's a lot of just garbage here. Okay, who the hell starts a book? Look right there. It says, "This book is a work of fiction, and any resemblance to a person living or dead, any place, event, or occurrence is purely coincidental. The characters and storylines are created from the author's imagination or are used fictitiously." First of all, you don't know anything about Marcus Aurelius' imagination. This is a cowardly, bureaucratic, just a killjoy thing to say. It's the type of especially nowadays. By the way, copyright, that's freaking one word, not two. Although I wouldn't expect you to know that. Who am I yelling at? Black and white classics. Those are the lazy, careless people who do not care about their craft. I think they're just cranking these out like, factory style, as many as possible. But don't buy black and white classics. All right. Look, here's the introduction. It's actually quite interesting. Quite interesting introduction. And then here's all the technical information. How about adding a little white space to separate the two? But it gets even worse. Even in my self-published books, I am not so careless. I'm not by no means a professional, but I am not so careless to push chapter titles to the bottom of a page instead of the top of the next page. Look at this. I would be embarrassed if I put out a book where, one chapter ends here. Here's the title to the next chapter, and then you have to turn the page for that chapter to begin. All right? Disgraceful, unworthy. This print edition is unworthy of the man and unworthy of the philosophy by which he tried so hard to live. Thank you for watching. See you next time. Shall either be no more or shall be ranslated. There's a little note that that's an intentional word, ranslated, and appointed to some certain place or station. I didn't quite follow.